Good afternoon. Today I will be presenting the Pantanal Lodge, Refugio Ecological Kaiman, which is situated in the southern part of the Pantanal wetlands in Brazil. As you can see here on the map, we have Refugio Ecological Kaiman down here on the very western side of Brazil, which borders the area around Paraguay and Peru. And then, so you've got Cuiabá up here in the north. That covers kind of the northern part of the Pantanal because the region is all around here. And this area is the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. And so this area is much closer to the city of Campo Grande. Caiman Ecological Refuge is certainly one of the most kind of the better well-established lodges in the Pantanal. Again, it has really pioneered the way for eco-tourism, particularly in the southern Pantanal, which is something I'll cover. I'll also go over the different accommodation options which have changed slightly in the last couple of years. And then also, of course, all the kind of immense amount of biodiversity and wildlife that you can spot here in the region. Okay, yeah, so as I mentioned, the lodge itself is located where this circle is here. You've got this enormous green basin of the Amazon here, and then south of that you've got Pampas, and then the wetlands and kind of Pantanal region here. And you've got the Amazon rainforest, and then of course you've got the Cerrado region, and then you've got the coastline. So the lodge itself sits on its own private reserve, and this private reserve is 53,000 hectares. Which is only really a very small part of the whole Pantanal region itself. The wetlands, the Pantanal and the wetlands is a natural region which encompasses the world's largest tropical wetland area, and it is the world's largest flooded grasslands. It's thought to be home to over 600 bird species, about 300 fish species, and more than 200 mammal species, including over 140 reptile and amphibian species and over 9,000 subspecies of invertebrates. So just from those different numbers, you can tell that it's already going to be an area of huge biodiversity. It attracts thousands of visitors every year purely for the very kind of intense wildlife experience. As I mentioned in my last presentation, which was on Cordial Lodge in the southern Amazon, even though there you can see a lot of wildlife, the wetlands in the Pantanal region really does attract more of the kind of the wildlife enthusiasts because you're guaranteed to see a huge amount just in one single day. The whole of the Pantanal was designated a World Natural Heritage Site and World Biosphere Reserve by UNESCO. So it is certainly one of those places that is protected against kind of even more intensive farming. So there's a lot of private reserves here as well as national reserves. But the area was always traditionally a place for ranch farming, which we'll see in a moment. So it's important for these two kind of endeavours to coexist peacefully and for the protection of the species in this area. So getting to the refuge, or the lodge, I should say, the nearest city to Refugio Ecological Kaiman is Miranda, which you can see here. So that's just over 30 kilometers away. Campo Grande is the nearest large airport. So getting from Campo Grande to the lodge, it's about a 4-hour drive. Most of that is on very good kind of paved roads, going through a couple of cities. And then the last kind of hour or so is on farm track, not necessarily that bumpy, but you know, you're coming off the main roads and going into the reserve itself then. And if there are people who want to fly by chartered plane, then it's a 50-minute flight from Campo Grande to Kaiman, or by road it's the 4 hours. And then also just one thing to bear in mind that it is 170 kilometers from Bonito, which relatively, you know, in terms of distances in Brazil really isn't that far. And so you're looking at building this into an itinerary, then that is that's something that's well worth it, because Bonito is one of those places that has a lot of incredible natural heritage, a lot of beautiful waterways and beautiful kind of areas where you can see very clear waters, lots of fish, and so that combined with here, I think is a really good option for an itinerary. Okay, so looking at the Caiman Ecological Refuge itself. So the name comes from the current owner, who wanted to come up with this to represent Kaiman's initiatives for conservation and regional progress. So the refuge is made up of the property, where you have 3 different principles around their kind of business. So they've got these 3 different activities. They're raising the livestock, have ecotourism and conservation, which they hope kind of will all kind of work symbiotically within this kind of huge 53,000 hectare area. They really wanted to show the viability of allying kind of conservation and progress with, you know, respect of the nature, by adapting its initiatives to the Pantanal. Within the Pantanal, you've got a lot of kind of unique cycles of nature and life cycles. And so they wanted to kind of show this while still respecting the cultures and traditions of the people who live there, and working together to bring up new ideas to develop and bring progress to the region. The creators of the lodge can really want it to be explained as there's kind of a creation of real world social and nature kind of scientific laboratory in a way. So the Miranda Ranch, where the lodge was originally located, was founded back in 1912, and it's still working today. So it's a traditional cattle growth farm. It was originally the property of English investors with a rich history, and the farm was dedicated to livestock activity for over 70 years, which is still mostly conserved today. So in the 80s, Roberto and his family, so Roberto Clavin is the owner of the lodge, which some of you may know about already. He wanted to start to bring kind of a more personal project to the area, which then led to the Caiman Ecological Refuge. And so the goal was to conserve the richness of this landscape as well as the nature, which he was able to visit all of his life because the ranch was in his family, but also provide for more people in the region to have the opportunity to enjoy the best of the Pantanal, and through this kind of development of the region as a tourist destination, he could see the real richness of the Pantanal in terms of the wildlife and biodiversity, wanted to open this up, but also was very aware that he had to conserve the tradition and culture of the region. And so the ranch is still there, it's still working on raising cattle. The animals are integrated with nature by a means of organic meadow fields and grazing pastures. This is just a very kind of rudimentary map, which we'll see a couple of times in this presentation, of the reserve itself. So this is the 53,000 hectare reserve. And this area here in green is called RPPN, which is a private reserve, which is cut off completely from ecotourism and the cattle ranching. And this is specifically only accessed by researchers for the preservation of wildlife and the flora and fauna within this. So when you first arrive, you arrive at this very central area, and then these are the roads that go into the reserve, where guests are taken for each of their daily excursions and activities. And then these 2 lodges here are where all of their accommodation options have taken place, but I'll go into that now. So basically, the accommodation options have changed at Kaiman. Over the years, since they opened in the 80s, they always had these accommodation options in the Cordial Lodge and Biozenia Lodge, which were 2 quite remote lodges out in the reserve, as you saw just now in that map. What they have been doing over the past year and a half was, as the pandemic hit and you know, obviously tourism slowed down a lot, they started renovating these 2 very, very large family ranch homes in the central area, which they were originally offering to guests on a private basis when groups came, but they've decided to centralize these operations now and bring in all FIT groups, or all FIT bookings, sorry, to the centralized area of these 2 beautiful ranch houses next to this very, very wide river, which I might call a lake every now and again, because it certainly felt like a lake to me. Which allows guests a much more kind of comfortable experience in a way. it's not their idea to be a luxury destination in the Pantanal, but what they want to do is kind of rationalize operations and offer guests a more comfortable location. So after they finish all the renovations, let me just 1 moment, sorry. They will have these two options, which will have 18 rooms altogether. And these are open from June. So the FID guests will stay at this kind of complex called Casa Kaiman, which will have much bigger rooms, much better space, more spaces for reading or just being alone. They'll have one central swimming pool between the two houses. They'll have pathways around that guests are easily able to go out and explore themselves. Whereas out on the different accommodation options they had before, Biozenia and Cordial Lodge, they were very much confined to the deck and the immediate surroundings because they were really out in the wilderness. They'll have these specific gardens, and they'll have a botanical garden as well with installation of honeycomb for Brazilian bees, a very specific bee that doesn't sting. They'll have stables in operation. So it's a really exciting development, really. And also around this area, you're likely just to see a huge amount of bird life anyway. You've got this large kind of water area that you can take canoes out onto, and there are families of capybara everywhere as well. So as always, they run these 3- and 4-night programs starting on Thursdays and Sundays in high season. And so that is from May to mid-November. And then they have a new low season from November until March time, where they can have daily check-ins. The minimum night stay is 3 nights in the holidays and the high season. So this is the other house. The first one you just saw now was Roberto's own home, and this is the slightly older family home. All of the rooms here have been renovated, so we'll get photographs of them quite soon. This is an aerial of that house, so as you can see, some really beautiful kind of architecture and kind of ranch style property. And literally just this week, we've been sent some renders of the area of what the kind of the more communal area is going to look like. So with a centralized pool, with these pathways around, outdoor fire pits, and then the central courtyard with the fountain inside. So yeah, we'll have this new Kaiman product post-pandemic to look forward to. So back again to this map to show you, because I'm going to take you through a little bit about Cordial and Biozenia Lodge anyway, because these will be available for private group bookings and families, should you want it. So here we have the local area, the centralized area, sorry, where the 2 houses are. This is where the check-in is. This is where their interpretation center is. It's where the on-safari team is. They also have their small town and village here as well, so that's easily accessible. And then you've got Posada Biozenia located here on the eastern side, and then Posada Cordillera up in the north. Just to give you an idea of space, these are located 22 kilometers from each other. It takes about an hour to get from this area up to Cordillera, and about 30 minutes from the central area to Biozenia. And so this again is the private reserve. I just wanted to mention that it basically occupies about 1/10 of the whole of their property, and it was chosen with the assistance of researchers from the University of Sao Paulo. It's about 5.6 thousand hectares, all fenced in, isolated from the cattle, and habitats of like wooded and scrubby savanna, a lot of palms. There are streams that go through it, and seasonal drainage channels and cordillera forests. And so there are hundreds of different species of wild fauna and flora here, and they are all very well researched and very well protected. So this is an incredibly important part of what they do at Kaiman. So Cordial Lodge, which is the one that's further up north in the reserve, is a beautiful lodge that's set on the side of this flooded plain. Actually, this area is flooded only really in wet season and the shoulder seasons. The rest of the year it is dry. As you can see here, they've got this wonderful kind of observation tower behind it, and this deck out the front, which you can see here is actually their pool. So you're really set in the wilderness here. You're surrounded by a lot of wildlife, a lot of different bird species. It has capacity for up to 10 people, so it has 5 suites. The suites are all very spacious, ensuite with balcony, a lounge, shower, aircon and ceiling fan. They're all very spacious and modern, and with these lovely decks outside and the hammocks. The communal areas have these very large, comfortable seating areas, one place for everyone to eat together and come together, and they'll have their own private guide at these lodges as well. So they've got this pool and dining area and bar, and then they have, they all have Wi-Fi as well, the TV lounge, and of course the observation tower, which I showed you just then. Plus a really beautiful area out the back where they still have more of these hammocks, but also a very large barbecue area where they'll generally always have, at least once during everybody's stay, they'll have a barbecue outside in a really beautiful kind of setting with lots of lights and candles outside. And then Biozenia Lodge is the one that is closer to the main area over to the west. This has 6 suites and is on the shores of this other flooded plain area. And this is generally one that tends to have water all year round. Again, it has a pool on the large deck and viewing platform where you can see the many different species of birds. They've got their own small refreshing pool. It can get very hot and humid in this area, so it's definitely a welcome relief to have these pools here that are not heated. So the rooms here are slightly smaller than the ones in Cordial, but again, they all have these outdoor hammock spaces and decks. I believe that these rooms are actually in the process of being renovated at the same time as the developments in the main central area. So we'll keep you updated on that as and when we find out more about what the lodges look like indoors. And they also have these really beautiful communal areas, again, with the large table that everyone comes together to eat, and views just leading out to the reserve. And so that is the idea with these places, especially kind of in being in such an area of such rich biodiversity. Your eye always wants to be outside because you're constantly seeing flocks of birds going past. It could be pairs of macaws or a flock of herons or something similar. And so that's why they've got these incredible decks and observation towers everywhere. The delicacies served at Caiman Lodge include a lot of traditional Pantanal barbecue. So this will be kind of slow cooked meats of every different kind of variety. They'll have things like Paraguayan soup as well, and a lot of, or maybe a typical savory pies made with corn and eggs, grated cheese, and lots of kind of, like farmland food, but also a lot of different influences from the area, from Brazil, but also from Paraguay as well. So they'll quite often set up meals inside the accommodation options, as I mentioned, but they will also do very special meals out in the reserve itself. They'll either have them kind of at the stables or in the farm buildings, or they might actually go deeper into the reserve and really set up a beautiful area with lots of lights and candles around, and have a barbecue out, which is a really, really special kind of surprise experience. And then even though it seems very meat heavy being a ranch experience, they will actually have these very hearty kind of vegetable stews, which is something that they grow organically in their local village. So yeah, that's definitely an option for people with dietary requirements. So the rates include this full board, but not with alcoholic drinks, 2 daytime and 1 nighttime activity per day. So these will include going out on walks, on trails, out in the jeeps, or out in the canoes. These are all taken in small groups, and they're taken with 1 naturalist guide and a local field guide. The On Safari team will give a presentation, and they'll also get an astronomy tour in high season. And then if you have guests who are interested in doing any of these activities on a private basis, these are available on request, but should be booked in advance, particularly in high season. So as with most of the lodges in this area, the main activities are really simply heading out into the wilderness, into the reserve, 3 times a day to spot as many, to have as many wildlife spotting opportunities as possible. Anyone who comes to this area will know that the main reason to come here is to get the most of this very biodiverse area for bird and wildlife spotting. And these are the kind of vehicles that guests can expect to go out in. So these very comfortable jeeps with seating that goes up in tiers, that everybody gets a chance to see. see something whilst they're out there. They're given a pair of binoculars whilst they're there. They're also given kind of glasses to wear and rugs to put around their knees if it gets chilly at night and if there's a lot of mosquitoes. One thing I would recommend is people take long-sleeved, light long-sleeve clothing, long trousers, long-sleeve clothing, and maybe even hats with mosquito nets over the top, particularly in kind of the rainy season, because there are a lot of mosquitoes in this area. And just to be aware that it does get a little bit chilly at night in the savannah area. There's a lot of trails that can be taken on the reserve along the different kind of dirt tracks and the roads. And this way, you can go at a very gentle pace, and guides are pointing out animal species on the way. These are particularly good for those quieter night walks and spotting amphibians such as frogs and snakes. And then there's also canoeing options. These are really good for like half-day excursions out, and particularly great at dusk. So that whole water area that you saw in front of the two houses, the Casa Kaiman, that's a really good area for the kayaking. And dusk is a particularly good time because that's when you get a lot of bird activity. Very large flocks of parakeets and parrots. You get the pairs of toucans and the pairs of macaws all flying around at that time as well. And then for extra costs, you've got the extra activities of biking and bird watching or photography. Now, generally, when you're going out on these tours, bird watching is something that will just happen naturally. You're likely to see between kind of 20 and 30 or 20 and 50 different species of birds every day. But if you have guests who are particularly interested in some very rare species of birds or birds that are more difficult to spot, or guests really just want to take their time at their own pace, and I would recommend they look into the bird watching extra option, because this also has an option of photography as well. And then going out on their bikes, which are really good mountain bikes. It's not hilly at all in this area, so it's nice and flat, so not at all difficult. But you've got this added bonus of not having an engine, and so you're surrounded by this wilderness with kind of in this silent aspect, and so you're more likely to see more species of mammals and birds this way as well. So on to the wildlife and the bird life. As I mentioned, there are over 6,000 species of birds in the Pantanal, so incredible place for bird watching. I mean, I'm an amateur twitcher, but I was absolutely blown away by the fact that I could note down about 70 different species within just a couple of hours. So these can range from anything from the tiny hummingbirds to the strange patoo owls that burrow in the ground, to squawking parrots everywhere, to these enormous huge jabiru storks, these ones in the middle, which are kind of prehistoric birds with this incredibly long wingspan that just come out of nowhere and fly over the tops of the treetops or across the roads in front of you. You've also got a lot of different birds of prey, such as hawks and eagles. These are the very large yakutinga that you find around the area. They're generally around the different ranches as well. And as I mentioned, there's lots of different species of owls around as well. And of course, the very iconic macaws and toucans that you find in this area. The different kind of macaws you get here are obviously the scarlet macaws. You have the hyacinth macaws, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment, and of course the green and yellow macaws, all flying around in their pairs or with their young as well. And then on to the mammals. So obviously people come here to see as many mammals as possible. There are capybara everywhere, lots of families of capybara just plodding around. They're very easy to spot, especially around the lodges. Tapir are an animal that people really are keen to spot as much as possible. These are more easily spottable in the drier seasons as they come out to feed from the watering holes, and they are one of the big five that people like to see in South America. This is an ocelot, not to be confused with the jaguars. They're a lot smaller. They are a lot shyer. I mean, relatively, they come out at night and can be found on the riverbanks. They're quite, distinct from the jaguar. Giant anteaters. These are my personal favourite. I find them absolutely extraordinary. You can generally see them swishing along the big grasslands with these enormous tails. They're about the same length as their bodies, with this huge hair that comes off them. They're really elegant, kind of bizarre creatures that may eat up as much as kind of 30,000 ants in a single day. And then you have coati, which are kind of everywhere. They're very kind of opportunistic animals, which I'm sure a lot of you will know from having been to maybe Iguazu before as well. Have a lot of deer, a lot of marsh deer hidden in the trees and bushes. You often see a lot of carcasses of deer as well around due to the jaguars. And of course armadillos, burying armadillos that you find in the side of the dusty roads. And you're likely to see some porcupine as well, I think. There are also monkeys that you'll find in the trees, the howler monkeys, the capuchin monkeys, and small groups of peccary pigs as well. And of course, the Kaiman and reptiles. So there are thousands of Kaiman in this area. The specific species are the spectacle Kaiman, and there is a huge colony of them here. This is quite an extraordinary image taken from one of the lagoons in the reserve. They're non-vicious, but they are certainly present. And of course, hidden in the banks and the bushes are the different species of snakes that you find in the area. I'm sorry if this is not a picture that some people might like, but you've got different species, including the anacondas, coral, and different boas. And so all of these animals, you're very likely to spot a lot of them. Depending on the season as well as when you go. The high season is our summertime, because that is the dry season. That's when you're more likely to see the most amount of mammals. They have this incredible interpretation center as well. It's very, very well curated, and a lot of really, really good information for guests, all about the history of the area, about the geography, and of course about the nature, the life cycles, the biodiversity. So it's well worth a look. And it's always included as part of the package, actually. The guides are taken here, and they also show the guests a presentation on the area as well, and show how important it is in terms of the biodiversity and how important it is to protect the different species. And so going on to the third element of Kaiman's model is their conservation. They currently run 3 different conservation projects alongside their ecotourism and ranch businesses, which are the Hyacinth Macaw project, the Blue-Fronted Parrot project, and the On Safari project, which is the one that everybody will know more about. Starting with the Macaw project, this is the longest lasting and successful one at Kaiman, with over 20 years of their studies. It's basically accomplished what every wild animal conservation project aims to, which is increasing the population in the wild, with the result being that the number of individuals of hyacinth macaws has, the population has almost tripled, which is absolutely outstanding. And so if guests want to take part in the Macaw project or see what it's about, there are half-day and full-day options for this. So the half-day is about $80, and the full day is around $130. The maximum of 3 people for each excursion. And you're out there with the project field team, and you're also out with an English-speaking guide. So these incredible macaws are under threat from extinction from trade, deforestation, and fire. As you may already know, there was an enormous fire in the Pantanal in 2019, 2 years ago. Luckily, the whole place has been completely regenerated since then. It's incredible how wildlife just bounces back. They were able to save the private reserve because the fire was getting very close to that, and that would have been absolutely devastating. So unfortunately, they did lose a few hyacinth macaws in that process, but they have still been able to protect a lot of their nests and rebuild a lot of their nests. They're very distinctive birds with these beautiful colours of cobalt blue and bright yellow around their eyes and beaks. And the same biologist and project coordinator who set it up in 1989 still runs it today. So the kind of activities the guests will be doing here are monitoring the macaws, monitoring their natural and artificial nests, and their eggs and their chicks, and also building, setting and repairing of the nests around a certain area of the reserve. It's a really interesting project, and I'd wholeheartedly recommend that people get involved in this. The second project that I just wanted to mention quickly is about these, what they call their true parrots or blue-fronted parrots, which are amazing, beautiful parrots, very intelligent, may live up to about 80 years. Now, these parrots are under great threat of extinction because they are the parrot that people look at to get for as pets, essentially. This is the main trade that they're taken in for. They're the ones that you can teach to talk, you know, they're very intelligent, they're also very beautiful with these very distinctive colours. And so they've set up this project to really monitor their behaviours and their biology, the ecology, to really protect these species here as well, which is another project that's been very successful in the area. And then on to Brigitte on Safari. So On Safari is a Brazilian NGO which was set up by Mario Haberfeld, who was a Formula One driver who traveled the world and took a lot of inspiration from the Savvy Sands project in South Africa, habituating leopards to humans and vehicles in the region, and working with local ranches to kind of coexist so that the farmers would stop poaching the leopards. So they wanted to build up the kind of a habitat for these big cats, whereby they weren't going to the ranch to kill the cattle, but kind of have them protected in this area, and work with the local ranches in that sense. So the project helps to conserve the species within the Pantanal, and also create some new jobs, and kind of create kind of progress within the area. And they've really grown since they were set up in kind of 2013, I think it was. They since have created rewilding projects in the Amazon and the Cerrado regions of Brazil, as well as in the Ibero wetlands of Argentina. So Kaiman is the only place we know of in Latin America where guests have really excellent chances of seeing jaguars in the wild from a safari vehicle. And this is opposed to seeing them from the public boats operating in the northern rivers of the Pantanal. These are the type of vehicles that guests go out in when they book onto the On Safari experience. And these are kind of small jeeps that are very versatile, they're very sturdy, they're easier to get out into the depths of the reserve. And guides on board carry their radars and radios with them, so they know where the jaguars are located. I'm sorry if you can hear the storm outside, it's just started to rain against the windows. So this is the kind of habituation you'll see of the jaguars. It is an incredible sighting, really, and it's an amazing situation where you are able to see these jaguars very easily in their natural habitats. So they might be nestled in amongst the trees and bushes where they're very camouflaged, and they might be lying on a branch, might be coming out into the grass areas where they want to feed. And these safaris also go out at night when the jaguars are still also very active as well. The guides are very good at letting people know how they should move and how they should behave around the jaguars. This is all part of the habituation process. So even if you're out in these small jeeps, they're very good at letting guests know that there should be no sudden movement, they should be very, very quiet. And this is the whole kind of the process of the research and monitoring of their behavior to make sure they are protected as well. So in terms of the statistics of sightings, which I know that a lot of people ask about, this shows that last year, 100% of guests in July to December and in March saw a jaguar. So this is to show that, excuse me, this is to show that the sightings are real and they are very, very prevalent. The On Safari was set up in about 2014, and numbers have just steadily been rising since then. And that is due to the success of their project. About halfway through, between now and then, there was about 50 registered jaguars. Now there's over 100 registered jaguars. So basically, these stats come from every guest that's staying at Kaiman. What is different between the On Safari and the Kaiman experiences is that if you only book onto the Kaiman experience without booking the separate On Safari, is that you're likely to see a jaguar, but maybe only once. Whereas on Safari, you're likely to see a jaguar more than once because you're out in these small vehicles going off-road right into the savannah. They have the radios, they have the radar. But one thing that is really great about this relationship is that the On Safari guides will radio the Kaiman guides and say, oh, we know where the jaguars are, you should come up and take a look, so that everybody gets that opportunity as much as possible to see the jaguars. And so that from this image, you can see the Kaiman vehicle next to the on safari vehicle. Obviously, this is quite an open space, which is why this Kaiman vehicle was able to kind of access it with the jaguars right in front of them. So if you can book onto the on safari experience in a full day or a full experience situation. A full day costs around $240 with a minimum of 2 guests, and that's about 6 to 7 hours. If you want to do this on a private excursion, it costs up to $990. And then there's a 3-day full experience that guests can book onto as well. And this is about $2,650 US. And it's up to 4 guests, and then an extra $500 for an extra guest. And then there's an extra experience called the VIP experience, and this is run by the project's founders and directors, Mario Haberfield, and a few other people. And this is where they bring in expert African trackers who visit the area a couple of times a year, or a few times a year. And so guests are then invited to be part of the tracking process. And this is something that's really quite exclusive with rates on request. Just to give an overview of how successful their project has been here. So in 2016, the cubs, Farah and Isa, were reintroduced from the Amazon. They were orphaned in the Amazon. And after the habituation process in their center, they were released into the reserve, and they have since had cubs each. And just this year and last year, their cubs have had cubs, making them grandmothers. And so this makes it a very well-established, successful project. They've got 2 reintroduced sisters into the Amazon. These 2 jaguars were rescued from local towns. And they've got 1 male jaguar who's been reintroduced into the Ibero Wetlands in Argentina very recently through Rewilding Argentina. And he has since fathered 4 cubs. So this again is an incredible success story, because there are no jaguars in Ibero Wetland. They are completely extinct there, and so this is the first time that jaguars have been reintroduced, and obviously been a huge success. So the times to visit. You've got the flooded season, intermediate, dry, and rainy season. So the lodge used to be closed in January. It is now open all year round. In the flooded season, it's generally covered in water. It can range from being very shallow around where the roads are. They've got a lot of drainage channels as well, so a lot of the roads will be open, but just to bear in mind that quite a bit of the reserve won't be accessible. So here you've got a lot of water birds that are available, well, easily spottable, and more of the kind of the pampas style mammals. And then as the water starts to recede, that's when you start to see a bit more wildlife, a bit more bird life. It also gets hotter, and a lot more mosquitoes, that kind of thing. The dry season, as I mentioned, in our summertime, this is the best time to observe wildlife. And you know, it's when the trees are in bloom, and you've got a lot of that mammals coming out to the water holes to feed. And then going into the shoulder season again, when it starts to rain. But then you've got a lot of bird species then with their young and teaching them how to fly. So that's a really interesting time of year to visit, and you've got a lot of migration going on as well. So I hope I have covered most of that. These are our key selling points on Caiman Ecological Refuge, with the new accommodation options. And then you've got these 2 private villas, Biozenia and Cordial. The 3 and 4 night all-inclusive programs in high season, daily check-ins in low season, 3 daily guided excursions a day. You've got the extras of booking onto On Safari and the McCall project, as well as biking and bird watching. All of these should really be booked in advance. And yeah, the Pantanal is just one of those areas that is just absolutely incredible for wildlife, and highly, highly recommended for anyone interested in biodiversity and bird life and wildlife of this region. I think I've covered most of their conservation and sustainability efforts, because it's a lot to do with kind of protecting the species, as well as bringing in a lot of kind of resources and jobs in the area as well. I didn't touch on the town element of Kaiman. This is something that's slightly different. It's part of the ranch, but they really do include people as much as possible. They've set up a school, they've got a doctor's surgery there, and they've really invested in that kind of local and cultural heritage. And there we go. So as always, this is the list of our partners. At the moment, I've only got one of these left now, which is Poçada de Junção, which is located in the Cerrado region of Brazil, again in one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, in the savannah, and it's where the maned wolf, actually, interestingly, I didn't mention, is that you can also spot the maned wolf at Kaiman, and perhaps it's not something that they want to advertise too heavily because Junção is the area where you're supposed to spot the maned wolf, and it's where on safari also spot it. But when I was there in May, a couple of years ago, we did spot a maned wolf there. But Junção is definitely one of the places that you're much more likely to see a maned wolf.